My full name is Carrie Cullen, Carrie. Last name is Cullen.
I want to kind of ask, like, what services do you provide, and kind of like, how does your contract work? Like, what services do you provide to people?
I've worked with several different like nonprofits and activist organizations, and so I've kind of transitioned into like a field of digital organizing and like communications instead of just like straight up filmmaking. So basically what that could mean is like managing social media, creating content, graphic design, websites, things like that. And so typically like, a lot of contracts will be month by month or hour by hour. And that rate is kind of set, but I also like, am an editor and do that for people. And right now I'm doing some consultation stuff too for like for someone who's trying to create like a digital presence and marketing. So I'm kind of all over the place.
Can you kind of talk about how your childhood was and how that impacted who you are today?
I grew up in a really, really like rural town. I moved in 8th grade, but prior to moving, I was raised by my mother, a single mom for my entire life. My parents got divorced when I was like a baby. And we definitely struggled a lot. We struggled with economic issues. We struggled with family relations. And I mean, I think just seeing like the resilience of my mom as a single mom, raising 3 children, and all of her children like grew up to kind of overcome what we were given, I think that like encouraged me and taught me to never give up, and to continue on my own path of resiliency. Yeah, I mean, I was the first woman in my family to go to college. My grandparents and both my parents are, very successful and have blue collar jobs, but never went to college or finished college. So it certainly wasn't like a path that I necessarily thought was like the only way to go. But I think I just always like having a lot of obstacles in childhood always kind of reminded me that I need to do something for myself. And as I got older, that something for myself was pursuing my dreams and like pouring everything that I possibly had, all my energy into school, and getting a scholarship to go to college. Like that was always the goal from the time that I was a child, because I knew like I don't want to always rely on a man necessarily. I wanted to be a career woman.
What inspired you to want to become a filmmaker?
I can't remember a time where I didn't want to be in film. I started out when I was very young in all kinds of different forms and mediums. I had like a little camera that I got from a cereal box. That was like how I began when I was probably 8 or 9. I think it's just the love for stories, and a love for people. And I think that, my work has evolved a little bit to be more human rights centered now. But at the time, what really attracted me to film was being able to create characters and profile characters and tell the stories of really incredible everyday people who, you may never meet as a viewer in your life, but they totally deserve to have their voice out there and be inspirational and be shared. And I think that's like still the magic that keeps me in this world.
When did you start actually making and editing your own films?
So when I was in 7th grade in middle school, a group of friends and I were like dealing with a lot. We were bullied and dealing with a lot of just like tough middle school angst. And I had a really incredible guidance counselor at the time who somehow like really believed in my dreams. And he lent me this like crappy old like tape recorder camera and said, well, why don't you try to like express yourself through images, through film? Because I was like a really shy kid growing up and still have a lot of like social anxiety. So my friends and I gave it a try, and we made this documentary about the school. And it kind of like started out as a joke, but then I took it very seriously, and then made another one the next year and realized it was like, a very early way that equality can be leveraged by using the creative arts, and by just storytelling and sharing other people's perspectives.
I saw that you attended Emerson College. What was the biggest lesson that you learned while in school?
Feel like what I learned most from college was not necessarily what I learned in a textbook or what I learned in a lecture, but it was like the just the crazy experience of hopping right into that in totally different culture, totally different environment. So I think I rolled into college like a very innocent, optimistic girl from farm town, USA. And I was just shocked by what the reality of the world was. Emerson is like right in the middle of downtown Boston. So I was living in a city for the first time and surrounded by so many people. And I honestly think that the unfortunate, well, not unfortunate, but the lesson that I learned, that it was unfortunate that I didn't learn it earlier, because maybe I came from, a more like quiet, privileged area where people weren't necessarily talking about this. I learned about the complete systematic injustices that our country and also the film industry are built on. And I think like seeing that oppression firsthand, seeing that inequality firsthand, living in a city for the first time, and also just seeing it on like student sets and seeing the way that some people were treated, others were treated better, seeing the like completely different levels of experience that people entered college with. Some people came from these like civilizations in LA where everyone in the community came from a family of filmmakers, and they went to like a super expensive private film school and entered Emerson like, at this like completely different level than I was at. So yeah, I think it was just seeing like how complicated and how completely deep some of these issues run, and how that can be reflected on a college campus and in a city and in an industry. So that sort of changed the course of my life forever.
In what ways do you feel like it changed the course of your life?
When I entered college, I had an idea that I wanted to do something to make the world better. I have always wanted to kind of like study and pursue a documentary path, but I didn't realize like how important and how many hands on deck we need to solve some of these issues. So I learned a lot about climate justice and environmental racism in college. And I think that like totally changed the way that I saw the issue, because originally I had seen it as like, we got to save the trees, but it turned into people are dying, I think that it taught me that we're all here on this planet to do something. We all have a path. And I think I realized that I can't sit content knowing that so many issues are erupting in our country, in our global system every day, and just make like, flat falling Hollywood stories for the sake of it. I realized that I needed to take my work deeper. It's my responsibility as a storyteller, as a media maker, and as an artist to do something and to have every image that I create have a legacy and inspire some sort of action for the future, and not just necessarily be self-fulfilling.
I see that you have a focus in environmental activism as well. Where did that kind of come from?
I think that environmentalism, and specifically climate justice, has kind of taken like the front seat in my life. It goes hand in hand with digital media, so that's great. But I think it started, I grew up in like I mentioned, a pretty rural town in New Jersey. When you think of New Jersey, you don't think of like farms, but that's kind of how I grew up, surrounded by farms. And yeah, I lived through Hurricane Sandy and thought I was not going to live through it. I mean, my family, like we lived in a log cabin growing up, so surrounded by trees, and we spent the night like huddled together with trees falling everywhere. And I just remember thinking, we are going to die. Like, we're not going to make it out of this. And that whole time during Hurricane Sandy was just so apocalyptic. Like, the streets were flooded away. We didn't have power for over 2 weeks. There was no way to know if your loved ones were safe, okay. Communication was down. And it like just changed my life forever. And that was also the year that I had an incredible history teacher who taught me about climate change for the first time. It was the only time climate change was ever mentioned in my public school education. And I remember just like kind of grasping onto that and sort of having that connection, that moment where it was like an aha moment, you know. And I realized that I was one of the fortunate ones, but people are going to continue to suffer and die from this problem, and I just needed to do something about it. So, you know, it started at an early age. I didn't quite know what to do with that anger until college, but then it was pretty clear that that's what I needed to do.
How important do you feel like good role models are for youth?
For those who necessarily don't have strong role models, say in school or at home in their family, I think a lot of young people look to media for role models. And I think that that is such a problem, especially for young women, because I mean, this goes back to kind of my field of work and also like a little bit of disillusionment that I have with the big Hollywood system. But I think that a lot of media is sort of like stripped for strong women characters, strong people of color in leadership roles. I think that a lot of kids growing up might not necessarily like see that power within themselves reflected in the content that they're seeing every single day on TV, in books, and that's a huge problem. And I mean, even if somebody has like a really wonderful teacher and then goes home and turns on the TV and gets these subliminal messages that they're never going to be good enough or they're never going to get there, I mean, how horrible is that? How destructive is that? So I think that's why Mama Bird Media is so important, because having strong role models and realizing that you can do it. This is not just a pipe dream that, you know, is impossible, that no one has ever done before. The path is there. You just need to kind of find it, you know? And I think having someone to encourage you, which is, I've been very, very privileged to have that throughout my life in many different ways. I think it's completely essential to believe in yourself and to have that energy to keep going.
Who was your biggest role model that you looked up to growing up?
I feel really privileged to have so many people in my life who were just so amazing and believed in me so much and were such strong role models for me. I mean, I mentioned my mother earlier, who was just like incredibly strong, resilient, and also humble. My grandparents also are beautiful people who have always inspired me and like have always had my back no matter what. My grandpa has a section of his basement that he refers to as the Wall of Fame, and like he has printed out every report card, every time I made Dean's List, every like screenshot from a video I worked on, or like, you know, a picture of a bridge my other brother who's an engineer designed, and he is just like so proud that he has that. So I think it's a matter of like having people who are really proud of you and who celebrate the little victories with you. That sets a really positive example for you to affirm yourself and to celebrate those little victories within yourself that are so easy to overlook. So I think kind of my entire family served as my biggest role model and also my biggest cheerleaders, and I still really lean on them for that.
How have you kind of like actively made yourself be like work better at that, at kind of like telling yourself it's okay and not like allowing yourself to kind of be stepped on by people? Like, what have you done to cope with that?
The more mistakes you make over time, the more you realize that they're not the end of the world. And there was a time where I think like a lot of my earlier problems came like from school, and it would be like if I didn't get an A and A plus, like this paper was a disaster. Like I was the kind of person who I would get a B and I'd be like, I failed, you know, like so dramatic. And I think the more you realize that like, oh my God, I failed this test and I woke up the next day, the sun still shined. I think you realize that it's just a part of life. But another like really big thing for me, learning tool for me in overcoming imposter syndrome and kind of like feelings of failure often is realizing the root of where they come from.
How do you handle criticism?
I really respect people who handle criticism well. The props to them. But it's really, really hard when you're a sensitive artist and person who like really throws yourself into your work. When somebody criticizes it or like says, you know, cut this, do that, like it's very painful. There's this expression which maybe you've heard, I don't love it. It's like you have to kill your darlings, basically. So it's this idea of like, if you create something and you really love it, in order for it to be phenomenal and like its best piece, you have to be able to like hurt it and like kill it and redo it. And so many times in my life, I've presented something that I stayed up like all night working on in college. And the professor is like, yeah, cool, like cut 15 minutes out of this or something. And it feels like they're telling you, like they're personally attacking you, you know? And it's like, it gets easier. You kind of develop a callus to it. And I think once, like the thing that really helps me deal with criticism is realizing that I can only grow from other people's perspectives. And it's sort of like, I can create something and not ask for feedback, and that's just me. But once you start asking other people for feedback and help, it's like creating this little like nebulous mind of all of these people's different perspectives and viewpoints from like their unique situation. And so you create this like beautiful hive mind piece that so many people have contributed to. And I think that is like, you get used to it and you learn to love that feeling. And criticism is never easy, but I think realizing that, and also realizing that like your self-worth is very different and separate from the work that you create, and it's not reflective of that. That's sort of the way to kind of like build up that callus, I think.
How do you know kind of what you're worth in terms of like what your projects and everything, and like charging and how much you should charge, and balance that out with wanting to help people?
I think that a lot of times, us people who work in like the nonprofit sphere or in general want to help people, and want to give back and contribute, lowball ourselves a lot. And I mean, of course, like it's very natural and understandable to want to do a favor for a friend or want to help someone out who's just getting on their feet or something, but it's just not sustainable at the end of the day. You can't feed yourself if you're consistently lowballing yourself. I mean, I think that's really, really hard, and it's just something that you learn with time. I am probably not the best person to like ask about specific rates and stuff, because typically my work is like a long-term contract or more of like a freelance sort of situation. But I think the best thing to do is to ask folks who have done it already. And I mean, reducing that rate, say like, you know, if you reach out to someone who is 60 and has been doing this their entire life and has like really high quality equipment or something, you might reduce that cost a little bit just because you're, you know, like starting out, and having a lower cost can help you get more clients and can help you move up a little bit. But at the same time, it's this really fine line of not underselling yourself, because what's going to happen is people are going to take advantage of you. I'll share with you, like when I first moved to LA, I had I like landed this job editing a documentary about like organic tea, and the woman wanted to pay me like way less than she should have for editing like hours and hours and hours of content. And I ran it by like professors, because that was kind of like who I looked up to and who I trusted, and they told me I was lowballing myself. But I also didn't believe in myself at the time, and I was like, well, she could get anyone. We're in LA, you know, but she chose me, and I'm like young and not good at this and don't know what I'm doing. So I'm just going to like let her kind of take the lead. And you know what she did? She had me come and do all this work. And because I kind of like didn't respect myself and didn't respect my art, I declined to like make a contract like everyone suggested. And so what happened was I edited basically the entire thing, delivered it to her, and then she was like, okay, well, we have one more round of edits to make. And then she ghosted me and never paid me. And like to this day, I feel haunted by that, because I spent hours and hours and hours working with this woman, and she never credited me. And like my work is out there for free, you know? So I'm not saying that that will always happen to you. I think it's a cautionary tale that I like to tell, because it may seem like being really flexible with people will help you like gain a better reputation, but in the long run, like that woman is a producer with like pretty high clout. She can go to her producer friends and say, this girl like you know, I scam, she's not going to say she scammed me, right? But she's going to say like, she's super flexible. You could push her around, do whatever you want, like get the work done for free or whatever. And then that's sort of the reputation that you get. And you are worth so much more than that. But I think like we're often taught that our art isn't worth anything. And we're just like not in a real, again, it's this capitalist system of extraction, right? Where if we do something for pleasure or just create art, it doesn't seem like it's worth anything if it's not tied to like a tangible financial outcome. So I think trying to like understand that any time that you spend on something, you should be paid for because your time is valuable. And I think that comes with time, understanding that.
How big of an impact do you truly think media like has on our world today?
Media can be broad. I mean, it can be, we could just be talking about like say film and television, but taking it further, we could talk about like the culture in which that inspires. And as I was saying earlier, I mean, I think it has such a huge impact on the way that we as viewers see ourselves and perceive our world. And I mean, it's a double-edged sword because I think that power needs to be handled respectfully. And I think it is, but I also think that in many ways it's not. I think that there are some really incredible things that are coming out of digital media and imagery in today's world. I mean, there are some really incredible action events that incorporate art and media. There are really beautiful and inspiring documentaries out there that are at our fingertips on, say, Netflix, that people can watch and educate themselves. But I also think that the majority of media is not, it's not up to par with what it needs to be in 2020. I mean, we're still in a world where there is extreme racial bias, gender bias, in the industry and who is making the content. And that's going to not only create a disparity in the industry, but it's also going to be reflective of the outcome. So it's kind of like this really deep, gnarly system that goes beyond what we're seeing, but also who is creating those images and then who is perceiving them. So I think that it has a huge impact. And I don't know, I don't think that a lot of people, or I should say, I don't think that enough people who create media are aware of that and are aware of the power of the very subtle things and the very subtle choices that they choose that can change someone's life.
What are some positive things that you see in like the youth today?
I think that today's youth, and even, I mean, I see you, Sarah, you're like a year or two, no, I guess you're more like 4 years younger than me. But I feel like you are just years and years and years beyond what I was at your age. I mean, when I was in high school, I told you I learned about climate change, which would later completely like redesign the path of my life. But I was maybe 16 or 17 when I heard that word. And I mean, today I work in the youth-led climate movement. And I see 12-year-old activists. I see 15-year-old activists. I work with middle school and high school young adults who are going to their elected official's office and they're sitting down and having a conversation and demanding better for their future. And I mean, that gives me so much hope because when I was 14, I was like watching SpongeBob or something. I don't know what I was doing, but I was not actively advocating for a livable future. Like I did not even know that these issues were at hand because I just wasn't exposed to it and I wasn't taught about it. And I think also the situation that today's youth have been confronted with is really heavy. I mean, I remember when 9/11 happened, I was like 3, but there are so many, like it's really interesting for me to think about that children that were or people that were born like slightly after me, that is their reality. You know, they grew up in post 9/11 America, and it is just one thing after another, whether it's, you know, climate change that's like pressing a heavy toll on all of us, or just so many different like human rights crises that have kind of been erupting into the mainstream. I'm so inspired by today's youth because I'm going to say you all, because I'm including you in this bucket of like incredible rock stars who are younger than me. Instead of letting that like spiral you into a deep depression, today's youth are standing up and they're fighting back against that. And I think what's starting to finally be recognized is the extreme power of being a young people. When I talk to elected officials about climate policy, it's young voices that they want to hear from, because those are going to be their future constituents. And also young people have the power of digital media and social media and pop culture influence at their fingertips. And today's youth generation is really utilizing that for kind of a really like one of the first times in history, I think. And so I feel so inspired and so motivated to give back and to support this next generation as much as I possibly can, because even though I'm a little bit, I feel like I'm kind of like in this weird generational gray area of being like a Zoomer and a millennial. I do feel like today's college students and high school students are just soaring above and beyond what I did at that age and what I was aware of. So I can only imagine what the next generation will be like, and also what today's youth are going to be like by the time they're like 25, 30. They're going to be like solving the world's issues every single day. So it gives me a lot of hope for the future. I think the only thing that I could, kind of pass on a recommendation to today's youth about would be to really know your worth and to know, like what I just said, the power that you have as a young people. I think that a lot of young people are kind of like pushed down for as long as they can remember. I mean, this is another thing that's kind of like subliminally taught to us in media. It's that children kind of should sit down and be seen and not heard, and kind of just listen to your parents and obey, obey, obey. And, maybe you should listen to your parents. Maybe that's not the worst thing in the world, but I think that we don't need to just sit down and accept the status quo and accept that our future and the quality of our future is in jeopardy. I think that today's youth needs to always remember the power that they have within, and the power of the youth vote and the youth voice, and really advocate for that. And also at the same time, I really would recommend that today's youth take care of yourself, because I know what it's like to kind of dive in full force, full speed, not resting for something else, for a cause. I certainly did that in college, and I know a lot of people who did it in college, and we need you all to stay strong. So stay healthy, take care of yourself, keep resting, and don't burn out, because we need today's youth to continue being the rock stars that they are when they are tomorrow's young adults, and the future's elders. And that certainly is a dangerous reality if burnout comes when you're, say, 14, 15, because you've been giving your all to many different social movements.
What is a model that you feel like you have stood by in life so far?
We're on this planet for a short time. We're basically just like, it feels like a long time. Some days feel longer than others, but time flies so fast, and we're just kind of a blip in the cosmos if you really zoom out and look at it. And what we do every single day is very much our choice, and it's up to us. And I think that we all have the power to change so much as individuals, to change so much systematically, and also in the people around us, in their lives. So whether that's a small act of kindness or, dismantling the patriarchy, which is something I would love to do in my life, but I know I probably can't. We all can do something. We all have the power to chisel away at those big issues, while also just, saying hello to a neighbor, or like sharing a freshly baked loaf of bread. Like, we all have these opportunities to make the world a little bit better and a little bit brighter, and to share our love with people. And I think that, we're in this world for such a short amount of time. And if you're not doing things that make you happy and make you feel self-fulfilled, and feed your soul and the people around you, then what's it for, right? So I really believe in like living each day intentionally, and making each decision intentionally.